This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com, and today we have a special UFO related interview with investigative journalist, Emmy award winning filmmaker, and author of such books as Alien Harvest, Glimpse into Other Realities, Mysterious Lights, and Crop Circles, as well as many others that we'll probably bring up in this interview. Linda Multon Howe, how are you doing today?
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this really very important global subject of animal mutilations, which are ongoing today.
Yes, I mean, this is mostly a combat sports YouTube channel, but over the past few years, I've been learning more and more about the UFO subject, and I feel it's an important subject.
Yeah.
And obviously, even people on this channel do as well, because overall, there's been a lot of interest in our UFO videos, which I guess they're known mostly now as unidentified aerial phenomenon.
It is the government decision with the UK that they wanted to change the brand, change it from UFOs to UAP, so that their documents, when they saw documents from each other, it would be in a category that they knew was serious, and that the public filing FOIA, Freedom of Information requests, whether in the United States or in the UK, if they filed for UFOs, they could legitimately say, we no longer keep any UFO files. They play this kind of shell game. And that's where they try to insert UAP. But it hasn't stuck. The whole world is, I guess you would say, we have a mental impression now, after 70 years since World War II, of UFOs as anything that is silver, a disc, a cylinder, a triangle, whatever it is. And so the governments were not successful in moving the civilian world away from UFOs. And now today, as a journalist for a long time trying to get to the bottom of all this, I find myself writing and saying UFOs, also known as UAPs, or you do slashes. But UFOs, they're there, they're stuck. They have been there since Roswell, and they are not going away. And it was not a subject. When I look back at my life in 1979, I was married, I had a child, we had dogs and cats, we had gardens to keep up. I was the director of special projects at the CBS station in Denver. I made documentaries. I did live studio shows on subjects affecting the state of Colorado. And I had been there from 1976 and had been previously, and this is important, before we got to Denver, we were in Boston, and my husband was working on an MBA degree at Harvard University, and I had been hired from KNBC in Los Angeles out of Stanford University with a master's degree in communication. I had been hired by the ABC affiliate in Boston to do all of their medical programming. So I was coming through a lens of every day of my life. I was dealing with crews. We were doing surgeries. We were doing every possible facet of medicine. And my husband was hired by Timing to begin what was then, hard to believe now, the beginning stages of expanding cable into the United States. And that was what my husband did as a corporate executive. And that was why we moved from Boston to Denver, where they headquartered, and I was hired there to be director of special projects. And it was in 1979, toward the end of the summer, I was working with a crew, guy out of LA, very skilled. He'd just come off a shoot for 2020 in New York when Roone Arledge and that whole thing was starting. And my cameraman and he and I were sitting having lunch in the middle of another production that I was working on. It had absolutely nothing to do with animals or medicine. But he said, You know, Linda, what a stickler you are for me keeping my battery belts going. Back then, this is another thing people don't realize. When we were shooting for news, shooting for documentaries in the 60s to the 70s, in my case, in the 70s, we had the crew, the cameraman and the audio had to wear battery belts that provided power for the camera and the Nagra. And the Nagra is the crystal sink when everybody used to see like this. They would do those claps. Those were the sinks, and you were dependent on those battery belts. You lived and died in remote productions on whether you had enough belts and that they were charged. So when he said, you know what a stickler you are, he said, I just came off of a shoot. They're doing it in New York, and it's a new news program. And he said it's about all of these strange, bloodless animals that are being found. He said, we were out in Kansas and Oklahoma and Nebraska. And he said, we'd arrive at the scene, and here would be one of these animals, and we'd get the camera and the Nagra out and walk toward to start shooting. No power. And we would put on every single battery belt. No power. And the executives in New York were upset. What is going on? That was my question, and what I've just shared with you is why I wanted to start investigating animal mutilations. The crews couldn't keep their battery belts charged in the presence of one of these bloodless, trackless animals. Well, when I started, because that's the day I decided I'm going to get into this. My first interview was with a sheriff named Tex Graves, and he had just retired from 23 years up in Logan County in Colorado. And starting in 1971 to 72, he started getting reports from ranchers, and he would come out and there would be a 2,000-pound bull on dry, dusty ground, ear, eye, tongue, jaw, genitals, rectum cord out, no blood, no fluid anywhere, and no tracks around the body of this 2,000-pound bull. So I said, I'd really like to come and see whatever photos you have. And I drove 2.5 hours from the station in Denver up to Sterling, Colorado. And where he retired to was a shop that he was doing vacuum repair. So we had 2 rooms, and he brought out a box of Polaroid photos. You can't mess up Polaroid photos. I counted them, 266 in a box. He had taken every single one of the Polaroids himself. I said, sir, could I lay these down on the floor so I can look at it chronologically? And he let me lay them all out, and I did them in groups of cases. And there was one series where you could see this large animal, the head was down like in a hole in the ground. The legs were perfect. The hooves were just perfect, front and back. Powder, literally powder, like face powder ground around this. It was a steer, 1,700-pound steer. I said, what made the hole? Why is the head in a hole? Ear, tongue, jaw, genitals, rectum, cord out, but I'd never seen anybody report this. And he said, when we got there, the deputy and I could see that hole, and I said, let's go around this animal 12 feet. Let's take photos going around, and we'll work our way in to the head. And he said the only thing we could conclude, because there was not a track of any kind, there was no struggle marks, there was no death throes, that was pure powder and this animal lying perfectly. And he said the only thing we could conclude is that whatever took the ear, the eye, the tongue, the jaw flesh, the genitals, and the rectum had paralyzed the body on the ground, leaving the head and the head only free to move. And that it was in the agony that the creature, the animal, was feeling, that it dug the hole with his own head and then died. At that moment, I went from where I had been since Stanford, doing medical documentaries for Stanford, then doing all the medical programming in Boston, and was coming into this story of what possible medical reason or predator reason or what could be doing this. And at that moment, as he told me that story, something shifted. And then he looked at me and he said, "Look, I'll save you some time. The perpetrators of these animal mutilations are creatures from outer space." And it was a jolt to my mind and my body and my spirit, and he was looking straight at me, eye to eye. And as I look at you eye to eye today on June 19th, 2020, 41 years later, I have walked, seems like thousands of miles in pastures in the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere. I have collected tissue from maybe 30 animals, where I go out into a pasture with scalpel or scissors and cut around the edges, label meticulously with wire labels. This is the sheriff, this is the mutilator, this is my scissors. Send it to a lab. They do pathological exam, and the conclusions come back. The collagen has been cooked. The hemoglobin has been cooked at the excisions, but there is no carbon black. We are on a planet of carbon-based life forms. You cannot take anything like a laser to any carbon-based life form, do any kind of an excision with heat, and end up under a microscope with no carbon. That's impossible unless you are not using a laser. If you are using some kind of a technology that we do not know, maybe sound frequency, you could cook, therefore no blood. You could take anything that you wanted, no blood, which is the symptoms, but you would never be able to find the carbon. So that started with a pathologist and veterinarians, and my goal was gather as much forensic evidence as possible, which is what I had been doing in all my productions before. And as I kept gathering the forensic information, it became very clear. Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada, yeah. Sheriff's Office in Colorado or New Mexico, or talking with somebody in England, everybody had the same. It's got to be predator, disease, or satanic cults. Completely contradicting, completely proving to me that that was government manipulated control of the media and the public. I did my documentary, A Strange Harvest. It was broadcast May 25th, 1980. It was like a bomb went off. We had the highest rating in Nielsen and Arbitron of any program ever produced in Colorado.
What was the rating, just out of curiosity?
19 rating and a 37 share, which was the highest they had ever got. And it was high because so many people knew a lot about it, even though it was supposed to be a subject that was off limits because of that mantra I gave you. It's predator, disease, or satanic cult, because that's what you heard from police officers, from sheriffs, from state elk people, and then came a call to me after that broadcast, May 25th, and it was from the Calgary Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And he said, introduced himself and said, we've heard about your broadcast and we would like to see your documentary. And he said, I just want you to know that we understand that you are linking the animal mutilations to an extraterrestrial presence. And I want you to know privately that we completely agree. And I said, sir, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Calgary, they have gone on the record, it's been in headlines, that the mutilations are being done by a satanic cult. He said, it's our cover. We don't want the public and the media on our backs in this investigation. That's what we put out there. And it was each step in the evolution of my trying to find out exactly if it is extraterrestrials, as Sheriff Tex Graves had said, what would be the motive? Which ones? Where are they? Why is the government denying at every turn that there is no evidence of any other kind of life forms in our universe? We are alone. All of that was repeated. And clearly, law enforcement, they were all talking with each other about extraterrestrials mutilating animals. So from that broadcast, May 25th, 1980, to this day, talking with you, I did an alien harvest, further evidence linking animal mutilations and human abductions to alien life forms. It's a huge book, 465 pages, has 200-300 images, maps, documents from veterinarians that I was able to get on the record that say right in the documents going back into the 70s, excision exposed to high heat, or cautery, no bleeding, no fluid, over and over and over again. But probably the strongest evidence that I've ever accumulated. One of them was Sheriff Tex Graves, and then there have been others in other states and other countries. But Sheriff Tex Graves told me that day in Sterling, he said, on my very first animal mutilation back in 1971, he said, I asked the local vet to go with me. I didn't know why they were calling and saying that they had an animal down with tissue that was missing and no blood. And he said, we got there, and it was a big cow, like a 1,700, 1,800 pound cow. And the vet began, and I've been through necropsies, and they take the cow apart just like guys used to take cars apart. And everything is all ordered and organized, and they're making notes. And the sheriff told me, he said, the vet, sheriff, and he had his white plastic gloves on. And he's got his index finger, and it's down inside the chest. He's now down in the chest of this animal. And the sheriff said, I don't know what I'm looking at. He said, get down here closer. He said, what I have looped over my finger is the pericardium that should be around this cow's heart. Look, Sheriff, there's no heart. There's no blood. There's no fluid blood or clotted blood in the aorta or the venous system. And this pericardium, this is around your heart. This is around cattle hearts. This should have the heart in it. And Sheriff, I have examined as much as I can and cannot find any hole, no cut. But the entire heart, which in a large cow averages 7 by 9 by 11 inches. They're about this big. To take the heart out of the chest of a cow, leaving the pericardium collapsed in the chest with no blood, no fluid, nothing in the artery or the vein system, and there was no surgery in the chest when they got to the animal. And Sheriff Graves said, the implications of what the veterinarian was saying to him began to hit him. And he said the vet just looked at him and said, don't ever call me on another one of these animal mutilations, because I'm not going to stand up in front of a group of reporters and tell them that what has happened to this animal is impossible to me as a veterinarian. Don't call me again. I ran into that several times where veterinarians would say to law enforcement, they knew what they were dealing with. So now the question is, these many years later, if it's creatures from outer space, what would be the reason that around the whole planet, both hemispheres, for at least since the early 1960s in the 20th century, and we're now in the 21st century, why would this be ongoing? And today, for the first time in the last 4 or 5 years, I think it has become clearer and clearer to me through people who are in the whistleblower category. There are tremendous numbers of frustrated military and intelligence and counterintelligence people. They know that we have alien intelligences based on our planet, underground, in mountains, and that they've been here for maybe millions of years. Humans, in this form of Homo sapiens sapien, have been here 45,000 years. 45,000 over 270 million? Whose planet is this? That is a fundamental, profound question now in 2020, because governments know that Earth is considered to be laboratory property by at least 3 competing extraterrestrial civilizations that have competed and been in conflict with each other for at least 270 million years. So if they have been involved in the manipulation of genetic material to create a variety of various kinds of life forms on this planet, including Homo erectus 2 million years ago, and all the models of standing up humanoid primates up to us, Homo sapiens sapien. What do they want? Why have they done this? And why is it that the alien intelligences have left us, one of the human experiments, completely in the dark, deliberately denied any knowledge about the source of where we came from? Or why? Why have these power brokers insisted that humanity in its various evolutions always be told it is the only life form in the universe? A huge lie. Why?
Starting to change now a little bit.
Exactly. I was starting to say today, for the very first time, it's the whistleblowers more than anybody else. Legitimate, provable backgrounds, DD-214s, evidence, photos. I get more and more and more, and I will do anything to protect those guys. They have come through their own evolutionary process like the rest of us. First, it's an order. You just don't talk. Then it's private conversation among people who have the same classified access to information. And then one of them gets hurt and has to retire from the work they're doing and goes out to a family, goes out, and here they were dealing with extraterrestrials, animal mutilations, human abductions, a whole host of things. And then they look at the world around them now through eyes of being outside of the highly classified, contained units that they have worked in. And they say, we've got technology that's 30, 35 years beyond. We know that extraterrestrials are abducting people and mutilating animals. And it's hitting, it's like an intersection. It's volume. There's that many people now who in military intel and counter intel have been exposed to the truth of alien intelligences versus this revolutionary time of a planet of 7.6 billion who know that they have seen a craft land in a farm, that they've seen an animal rise in a beam of light. And they used to be terrified. They would never tell anybody. And now, hopefully, because of my work and other people they're beginning to feel like I have felt for 40 years. We, the surface life on this planet, who are taught when we are children that we are the only singular dominant species, and then you go into investigating animal mutilations and then human abductions and then government cover-up and on, and you come out the other side and you look at your fellow humanity and you say, we are an abused species. If you go back just 45,000 years, the alien intelligences that manipulated DNA in already evolving primates, which is a sentence in a document that I was shown at Kirtland Air Force Base, and it said for the President of the United States of America on it. And in the paragraphs of various subjects about what the government knows about extraterrestrials, it said, quote, never forgotten, extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien. That would be Homo erectus. And Homo sapien are the two Latin words that encompass standing up primates. And we happen to be the latest one. Now the question is, where did the permission, question mark, treaty, question mark, collaboration, question mark, kick in the early 1960s? That the government of the United States and the allies from World War II were giving permission to alien intelligences in exchange for technology to mutilate animals and abduct humans. And that is a subject that is evolving and growing more and more because whistleblowers have been exposed to the truth and they are talking more and more. It leaves me with this fundamental bottom line. If we could be introduced in the next hour, face to face on television, a gigantic landing in a huge field covered by all of the cameras in the world, and humanoids that look very much like us, with or without hair, came out. With everything I have told you up to this moment, the question I would like to ask, you made us. Why not let us know the truth?
And I have to ask, just because I watched Steven Greer's latest documentary over the weekend, which I wasn't a big fan of, but he alleged in this documentary that all extraterrestrial life only wants peace, and he claimed that any cattle mutilations or abductions are only the U.S. government trying to trick people into a false alien war. What's your opinion on that?
Who is he working for? Because that is counterintelligence lie.
I think himself. to try and get people to buy his products and so forth.
No, but I've given you just a glimpse of the forensic evidence that you or anybody who went to investigate an animal mutilation, you would find it's repeatable. It's repeatable forensic evidence. It is the pristineness, not the gore. There is no gore. There's no blood. There's no fluid. There's the huge mystery. And then you get doctors and pathologists and people who know what they are doing, and they are telling you that what has happened to the hemoglobin and the collagen that has been cooked and there's no carbon residue. They don't even understand how that's possible. And the missing hearts in total pericardium. There is nothing that our military anywhere on this planet has that could do that. And further, you cannot dismiss the people who dismiss it. They are suspect to me because they are denying material that you can find hemisphere to hemisphere. How many people have seen beams of light coming from something that is round in the night over pastures? Describe seeing the beam come down into a pasture. Some see an animal go down into the pasture, so they catch it being returned. Other people are seeing it go up in the beam. They don't know what's going on. In the morning when the sun comes up, and they will say right to your face, "Oh, it scared Jesus out of me. I went back to the ranch house and there was no way I was going back there till the sun came up. And then I walked back where I saw the beam and I saw the animal going up. And there's my animal. And there's no ear, no eye, no jaw, no tongue, no genitals, no rectum. But Linda, there's no blood." That always gets people. So people who are saying or are being paid by units of governments to say that it is a secret branch that is doing animal mutilations for X, Y, and Z reasons, it's not true.
And you mentioned the theory. I'm not that familiar with it. The first time I heard about it was actually your interview with Tom DeLonge about the 3 competing extraterrestrial races. Could you elaborate on that? Because I only just heard about it and you didn't go into that much detail in the YouTube clip I saw.
In 1999, I was living and working in Philadelphia. And about probably 7, 8, maybe it could have been 10 years before then, which would go back to 1989. In the 80s were the pivotal arena of going from somebody who was completely innocent upon finishing A Strange Harvest that was broadcast May 25th, 1980, and then getting through the 80s. It was like walking through a razor blade landscape. I was in perpetual danger. The threats were palpable. And the only thing that I knew is that the world is being lied to, people are being lied to, and somebody has to report the evidence. That's when I was doing so much of the animal mutilations with slides of animals and people sometimes being upset, but most people saying, "I never realized you said they were pristine. They are really clean." I would get that a lot. Okay, so I was in a conference in San Francisco, high-end, upscale city then. And I had done, it was animal mutilations, and with photographs and evidence and everything, documents. And a man and a woman came up to me as I was putting my computer stuff into the bag, introduced themselves. And the man said, I work with the World Bank, and I would really like to be able to talk to you more about what you've presented. And that began a relationship that went for the whole decade. They would meet me in cities, they would go to conferences, he would call me. And my attitude was, he's probably working for an intel agency. The bank would be, the World Bank would be the cover. But I always said, I even joked with myself, if you don't know what I know, then we're all in trouble. And it was just an ongoing, okay. So it was in late November that he called me and he said, a colleague of mine is retiring from the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington. And he would really, really like to meet and talk with you. And he said, he has your book. This was my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness. It has a 106-page chapter about what abductees call the resurrection technology. Banks of clear tubes with light top and the bottom. And when they have been abducted and they are in one of these rooms, it can be with praying mantises, it can be with grays, it can be with very tall whites, it can be with a variety. And in these banks of tubes, the resurrection technology, there can be tall ET-looking beings, there can be short beings, there can be absolute, what else? Homo sapien sapien looking humans. That chapter came from 6 different people in the human abduction syndrome who saw, experienced the resurrection technology. And that's what the man retiring from the Defense Intelligence Agency wanted to talk to me about. It took a month. He said we could not meet anywhere near where he lived or where he worked. It was up to him. I said I was willing to travel. I had done it before. We met at lunchtime in a very busy, very noisy place where there were a lot of boats. And after the beginnings of where you go through and he's taking a measure of me and I'm taking a measure of him and the World Bank friend is sitting there, he said, would you have any objections if we move down there? And there was a bench. I don't know if he had somebody keep it clear. I have no idea. It was crowded, but here was a bench and it was made out of cement. It was about 7 feet long and about 2 feet wide. So 3 of us could sit on that bench. And we walked down there. And I thought, for a moment, I thought, wow, this is going to be uncomfortable because it's much easier to talk to people eye to eye. This will place us next to each other. But in the end, it didn't matter because what he told me, 7 hours, it was our bladders that finally we couldn't go any longer. And he started out with these words. My job at the Defense Intelligence Agency for 23 years has been to monitor and analyze the competition and conflict between 3 competing extraterrestrial biological civilizations on this planet. And I've never forgotten those words either. And the way he described the 3 groups and the reason for competition was this in a nutshell, because it took 7 hours. Most amazing discussion I've ever been in my life. He said there were 3 distinct extraterrestrial civilizations that considered planet Earth to be a laboratory that they had used for at least 270 million years and that our government had proof. And I said, what proof does the government have? He said, it's too dangerous. If I told you, you and I both would be in trouble. And he said, I mean, you could be killed and I could be killed. What would be such dangerous information? He never said, but went on to explain. Some are reptilians, some are grays, and some are the Nordic blondes. And he said the first here were the grays and the blondes. He said they have been fighting with each other for millennia. The reptilians, he said, didn't come into the picture until there was some sort of, like in Star Wars, Star Trek, where you've got a group of people, give me the word, I started to say federation, where there is a federation in the Milky Way galaxy that is concerned about what has happened on the Earth and sends in troops to quell whatever it is that is being fought about. And he said, the reptilians are supposed to be some kind of a police force. But he said, the truth is, we have finally understood. As soon as the reptilians showed up, the blondes, because they can do this, using their resurrection technology, they can clone anything that they want at any time. They cloned the bodies of the police force that had come to try to control them, and then they inserted themselves into their reptilian clones and thus immediately invaded the so-called police force. And he said, and then we know that the gray beings that have a lot of artificial intelligence among the grays, that's why there's a menagerie. There's some prime intelligence, but most of it is AI. They did the same thing. Only they didn't just do that of the reptilians, they also made Nordic bodies. So now you've got the grays in two. And then they all end up doing this, and he said, the whole history of Earth is because we have had three competing extraterrestrial civilizations with the ability to neutralize gravity, project holograms that the human mind cannot discern from the matter world around us, and invisibility. They are masters of invisibility. They use it offensively and defensively with each other and with the human, evolving, standing up primate humanoids that they have been involved in making. And he said, we, the latest round of standing up primates on Earth, we are still being told by the power brokers of humanity that we are alone in the universe and that all of the truth about three competing civilizations using this planet, the moon, Mars, throughout the solar system and beyond out into the Milky Way galaxy, we are told that we are alone and that people have been killed to keep that statement. We are alone, alive as the living paradigm for civilization on this planet.
So why would they not reveal themselves? Why does it have to be under the ice, as I believe you wrote a book about that, or hidden from us? I guess it seems like the government's coming out a little bit now, as you've reported on. Back in 2017, the US Navy released those UFO videos. This year, the Pentagon and Department of Defense have gone on record that UFOs exist. So we're starting to see some form of disclosure now, but why the secret?
I bow to the focus as you ask the question. It is a repeated question that I've had in my own work. Why keep this a secret? I can speculate with you. I have been told a number of things. And where it veers off and it may be why people are, whether they're investigators or whether they're working for the government or military or whatever, why they are so uncomfortable. But fundamentally, I think it has been kept silent and secret because the way to control the various evolving, standing up humanoid primates on this planet up to Homo sapiens sapien, and then especially Homo sapiens sapien, was to place homogenized thinking in buildings called churches. More humans have died in the history of recent humanity in wars about whose God is superior to another God than perhaps any other reason. And nobody wants, especially not political people, they don't want to touch the whole issue of homogenized thinking that is controlled and manipulated in religious boxes as the route that the competing ET civilizations have used to manipulate and keep humanity in certain tracks of thought. Ultimately, this is my own sense. Ultimately, I think that if we can survive ourselves for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years through COVID, through climate warming, through potential wars, because we could annihilate ourselves. But if we survive the next 20 to 30 years, which I've been told by people who said that our government used remote viewing and have identified over and over that the most dangerous decade was in the 21st century between 2020 and 2030, the decade we are in right now. If we get out on the other side, maybe Elon Musk will have the base on Mars. Maybe we will have succeeded in the United States having a public base on the moon. Maybe they will open up what whistleblower after whistleblower has said to me. We have had interstellar trade in collaboration with one or more ETs since 1972. So you're talking about fundamentally the policy of silence and denial has been a way to control, while the power brokers of this planet, whether we're talking about the black underbelly of the United States government or England or Russia or whoever, they were already collaborating with some sort of other intelligence that could leave the earth. I'm not talking about people who are kidding around. When they say interstellar trade, the way they've described it is, Linda, it's throughout the Milky Way galaxy. What are they trading? I said, everybody likes and needs gold because of its very specific inert properties. It's been listed to me here on the earth. We are running out of rare metals in a public way. But some of these people have said, we have been getting niobium and other rare metals through interstellar trade since the 70s. But it's not knowledge that is shared with the world public. It's just over and over and over again. How have we ended up on a planet of 7.6 billion standing up primates who have been kept in the dark on purpose What is our function for them? What is it that the theys want from Earth and humanity? And that's what I think, if I summed it all up, what has fueled my work for 41 years is that the deeper I got into this, leading up to talking with you today and going to talk with other people as we keep moving forward, I think that there is something so extraordinary about the spirit of humanity, about something that we are. We're difficult, we are too violent, but we are extremely creative. And I think on a spiritual side, that the soul that inhabits the container bodies of Homo sapiens sapien, it may be unique in the entire universe. And isn't it ironic, if that is true, if that is what the non-humans recognize and they want, that humans are now at a state where we are trying to come out of sexual abuse, racial abuse, men versus women abuse, transgender abuse. There's so many things that are colliding right now in issues that have to do with humanity as something special, not being able to tolerate itself. That's where we are. Humanity is not able to tolerate itself. But if we could get past, and the toleration changed to compassion, this might turn into heaven on earth.
Now, we've heard that UFOs have a bit of a relationship with nuclear silos, particularly, I guess, in the US. They've they've been seen a lot around warships as well and so forth. What do you think the intentions are with the nuclear stuff?
It is a really good question. I have interviewed several people who have been firsthand underground when a sabotage alert team has let them know 80 feet down under a big, huge, red glowing UFO is sitting up over one of the missile silos, and pandemonium and alerts. And I interviewed one of the engineers who worked for Boeing, who had been involved in the construction at Malmstrom Air Force Base of all of the Great Falls Minuteman silos. We have them in Wyoming and in Montana and up in the North South Dakota area and so forth. So this was Great Falls, Montana. And he told me this was the case where, in total astonishment, those that were watching over the Minuteman silos, this UFO came, it was seen, and I think they had it on some kind of radar. And then they watched in complete and total horror as Minuteman missile after Minuteman missile went offline regularly, every 6 seconds. 2 banks of nuclear missiles did that. The Boeing engineer said, I was involved in the making of this system. And what happened in the presence of that UFO above, being watched by the sabotage alert team, could not happen. And what he meant was the humans had no idea. How was this done? My own brother was in the Air Force, was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. He was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base. I was doing the medical programming in Boston. It was 1975, and I think it was October. And I was working on a script for the medical series, and the phone rang like near midnight, and it was my brother. Linda, a huge UFO has set down on the base tonight. And in a short form, a sabotage alert team reported that over one of the missile silos was this football field size, 300 feet in diameter was their estimate, and it was glowing a phosphorescent or fluorescent orange. And they report that it's there. And my brother is in a wing command party, and everybody's buzzers start going off. And he gets, when they have buzzers and alerts, they will then get a signal about what they are to do. And it was plan A1, and you go to the helicopter and you're waiting for general this, and you do that, and as fast as you possibly can. He was in the air. Now he's hooked into all of the radio traffic with Central Security Command. And he said he's listening with his own ears. And the sabotage alert team is saying it just disappeared. It can't have traveled. It just popped out like you would turn off a light. They had scrambled jets. The jets get over. The sabotage alert team is down there. They've reported that it has disappeared. The jets circled around. They called back my brother in the helicopter. And a few minutes later, after everything's been called back, this huge 300-foot diameter fluorescent orange disc pops on. The sabotage alert team yells, "It's back! It didn't go anywhere. It's there where it was." And then they watched, and on radar, they had it. It went up 200,000 feet, Dopplered off of the radar screen. 2 days later, my brother had somebody said, do you know what happened? We got out the targeting information. It was in a magnetic tape. Just the zeros and ones, just the zeros and ones for the target had been changed. And I said, what did they change it to? And my brother said they wouldn't tell me. They said they would really get in trouble if it leaked out. But they told my brother that the zeros and ones on the magnetic tape, the targeting information in that missile, have been selectively changed. And that was a missile 80 feet down. So that means that we were dealing with UFOs that can change zeros and ones in an isolated tiny area on a magnetic tape that is 80 feet underground, and on the top are those thick, thick cement silos.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be sure what exactly they want with that, whether it's good or bad intentions. We hear some people say they don't want nuclear bombs to go off, so they'll disable them. But we hear others say that, even Tom DeLonge, I heard him say once, it almost seemed like they were trying to start a war with the US and Russia. So what do you think it is overall?
I'll tell you what an airline pilot told me. This was exactly the question, and we were talking about what had happened in the Minuteman missile ranges. And he had sought me out because in the airline he had his own encounters with UFO. And so he was familiar with some of my work. And we were talking about what would the ETs be trying to accomplish at the Minuteman silos. And this was a very interesting reply of his that I've never forgotten. He said, well, I'll tell you, after what I've seen and the discussions with physicists that I've had, they say that we are dealing, if you look at the sky and you think about seeing a glowing red disc, he said the human automatically thinks that the red glowing disc is something like a metal airplane, round, or it doesn't matter the shape, but matter. He said, what I have been told by physicists is that we are dealing with intelligences that know how to move dimensions. And that when we see something glowing in the sky, it is like a tear, T-E-A-R, a tear in the fabric of the reality of this dimension in which Earth is orbiting the sun. The tears, it is the tears, he said, that are a key. And if we ignite atomic bombs or hydrogen bombs on this planet, the physicist told me, we would be ripping in to the fabric of space-time, and that what are controllable little tears that UFO and ETs might use coming and going, that the release of atomic and hydrogen bombs would tear huge holes, and then, he said, what can come through those tears in space-time may not be controllable, and Linda, it is not all good.
Okay. Do you have time for two more quick questions?
Sure.
The only mutilation of a human I've read about, although I'm sure you probably know more, is that Brazilian reservoir case where the human had all the signs of a cattle that's being mutilated, including dying of pain, as you mentioned, from the cattle. And I was just wondering if you believe that's a legit case from your research into it.
I don't have any firsthand investigative information, but I know what you're talking about, and it fits into another category. Just as recently as 2 years ago, two different people, one working in the Pentagon, one Navy SEAL. They don't know each other, so they're two independent streams to me. But they're telling me the same thing. That in South America, it's as if that is a territory that is handled by whatever deals with the Earth differently than the rest of the planet, and they're not sure why. That there have been what they put in the category of experimentation with human bodies, animal bodies, what we'll say aviary bodies, and that they are puzzled, the they being military government. Why is it that some of the same kind of bloodless excisions in human bodies, or just the skin of a human found hanging in a tree, or really strange things, with mutilations being one of the more common, I mean, animals. Well, if you jump all the way back to December of 1999 with that DIA analyst talking to me next to those boats that were so noisy that covered up the conversation, the implication was that if you've got three competing ET civilizations, and they all three have different and in some cases similar goals if it comes to trade, and one is Nordic, one is reptilian, and one are the Greys, the menagerie of Greys, you are not going to have the same experimental priorities at the same time of the three. That there are going to be three different lines of approach, use, habitation with Earth. And that's when he says, we know that the blonde ones like to go down to the bottoms of the basins of oceans and seas, and they literally go through the basins, the bottoms. I'm talking about if you went down to the Mariana Trench, 7.6 miles, deepest place on Earth, you get to the bottom, you would have technology that would take you through the bottom of the Mariana Trench, because you would have some kind of spherical geometry computer analogs that would be able to tell you what was, here's the bottom of the Mariana Trench. it would show you that there was a huge cavern here. And all you have to do is penetrate. And obviously, they have technologies that move through walls, through windows, through ceilings. They can move everything apparently at the atomic and the molecular level. So if the Nordics like it to be in big caverns beneath the oceans and the basins, if the Greys like to be in the Himalayas and in the Cascades and in various mountains like Zeal and what remote viewers have remote viewed, where do the reptilians like to be? The DIA guy told me. He said they like it hot. The Nordics like it cold. The Greys handle a broader range of temperature. And he said the reptilians have based themselves in what we call the Middle East for eons.
Wow. And finally, President Trump, yesterday was the first time I saw this clip. You live in New Mexico, of course. He was asked a question by a reporter about if he's ever going to declassify the Roswell files. And instead of dismissing them, he actually said he's seen them, very interesting stuff, but he doesn't know about declassification. So what do you think about the president not just totally kind of brushing away the topic as we've seen them do in the past?
I think that he has been read in on more about the extraterrestrial civilization than any of us would ever have thought possible. There's a reason why, but it's better I don't go into it. And that makes it very, very difficult to understand what his day-to-day priorities and tweets are about. Because if he really does have some understanding of the large and huge scope, both historically and going into the future, there's no question in my mind, whether it's Elon Musk, we're going to have a base on Mars. It's going to be a stepping stone out further in getting our public up to speed. We've got teams that are already out in the Milky Way galaxy on interstellar trade. How do they get that reality joined up with a planet that has been told for 5,000 years that we're alone in the universe? It's schizophrenic. So it's possible that he has been exposed to the need for the Space Force, because it has to be a public Space Force in which they can then take the interstellar trade people and everything that's going on. Once they've covered it up officially, okay, Space Force, it could cover up 40 years of going out into the Milky Way galaxy. And the same on Mars. When Musk announced, was it 6 weeks ago? He said that he was going to take, starting in 2024 as the earliest possible date, maybe 2026, that he was going to have his, I call them star cruisers, going from Earth to Mars, and he was going to have enough of them made that they would be like a baton relay. And that he said, on the record, you can do a search and find this, that by 2030, that's only 9.5 years, by 2030, he would have 1 million Homo sapiens sapien from Earth in a base on Mars functioning. And the first thing that hit me when I was reading that, what does Elon Musk know? What has he been read into? That means that there is some urgency to get 1 million people from Earth on Mars. What else do they know could be coming, could be happening, that they want to make sure that they really have a large contingency of Homo sapiens sapien on a planet quite a way away from Earth? Meanwhile, everybody I've ever talked to who is a real whistleblower says we have had a base on Mars, or sorry, on the moon. We've had a base on the moon since the Apollo program. Another base covered up. Well, they get the Space Force, they can put it all inside. And so everything that may have been there for 40 years, they can open it up to the Space Force as brand new, brand new. Oh, look at how we're evolving. Look how we built this space. Oh, look what we're, and it was there all along. So that to me is part of the difficult shell game that they're up against now, is how do you join a planet that has been told for 5,000 years there's no other life in the universe, with our working with extraterrestrials. Many whistleblowers say that we're working with certain ones, but when you say, well, which type, with which agenda, that's when everybody gets kind of closed-lipped down, like that is another huge secret. Why must it be like that? Well, I think they've got to get the cover. They've got to get the Space Force so that it has physical buildings, that there's a budget, that they know that there is a trip we're going to take to Mars, but they don't know that already inside of a big lava tube since 1971 that there has been a base on Mars, which I've been told there is. So we're at this time where it's schizophrenic. There's no life in the universe. Meeting up with, we've been out there since the 70s. It's just like COVID slamming us. And the people who have all the knowledge and the whistleblowers are really, really, I think, trying to tell some real truths. It's this. And then you get people who say, you just can't do this. You just can't upset humanity. You can't do it. My reaction every single time at the most fundamental level of my being, anybody who says you can't do this, they're saying that we humans that are left on Earth would then be living on a concocted planet forever until X happens, while a whole other contingency of humans on Mars and beyond, they're the only ones that are allowed to know the truth. Earth is to be coddled and kept in a state of denial. And that has been sort of behind some of the arguments that I have seen and heard over the last 40 years from people who are very intelligent, who simply say, Earth can't handle it. That to me is totally wrong-headed. Humans are never going to grow up and possibly stop warring and killing each other if they aren't finally told, shown, and convinced the truth. Not only are we not alone on Earth, we're in a universe in which consciousness prevails everywhere.
And it seems like a lot of people that don't want to believe still don't really believe, even though the government has declassified certain videos anyways. So I think even if they declassify more, it might take a while for everyone to actually wake up to it.
Well, here, one last category. You might do another big show with some of the people who are investigating hybrids and others. In the huge human abduction field has been emerging more and more and more books coming out. Meet the hybrids. There's no question in my mind or Whitley Strieber's mind or Jacques Vallée or a lot of people that there has been genetic manipulation of the ongoing Homo sapiens sapiens species, and that on the other side of the manipulation are hybrids. It was only last year that I was told a startling statement that the current CIA estimate was that 30% of the current human population were hybrids of an extraterrestrial line combined with a Homo sapiens sapien. I do not know whether it's reptile, whether it's blondes, whether it's grays. I have no statistics or insight, but hybrids. And remember when Robert Bigelow, the owner and founder of Bigelow Aerospace, approximately 2 years ago, was on 60 Minutes. Lara Logan was the reporter interviewing him, and he was in the Bigelow showing those blow-up units that can go out to the Lagrange or to the moon or to Mars. And he made a statement that used the word something like aliens. And Lara Logan, in a kind of smirk, she was really broadcasting a kind of sarcasm, said, "Do you really believe in aliens?" And it's now famous. His face was serious, and he said, "They are right here under our nose." Well, a lot of people said, what does he mean? I think it's clear. Hybrids are here. Hybrids are among us, but they are humans. But genetically, they are hybrids, but they look human. And that raises a very interesting question. I am not saying that I have any proof of what I've just said. I'm saying it was a statement made that the CIA has an estimate of 30% of the Earth's population being hybrid of some kind of extraterrestrial and Homo sapiens sapien. And when you think about abductions, they're always involved taking sperm and taking eggs. There's always a genetic component to the abductions. Are we, just like Robert Bigelow said, are we in a revolutionary transition in which there's not going to be a war? There's not going to be violence. There's not even going to be conscious knowledge, but that the current state of Homo sapiens sapien is going to go away, and the hybrids will be the new state. Whatever it is that has been changed, will they be less violent? And that is, I think, a fair question to ask about the whole big picture of this. Why would 3 extraterrestrial civilizations able to move portal to portal, they don't have to go in Euclidean geometry, millions of light years for years. No, they move portal to portal. Why would they compete with each other over Earth? Why would they be preoccupied with creating standing up primates? Maybe once upon a time, it was the Anunnaki story that they wanted primates, humanoid like them, sort of, with a brain tweaked just smart enough that they would bury things and dig up gold and be workers. That's the Zecharia Sitchin story, that's the Anunnaki story. And maybe that is how it began. But the one very important ingredient in this whole huge, gigantic universe is, what if the missing ingredient in all of these discussions is the divine field from which all matter worlds has come? And that the divine world and the divine field is the only source for the souls. And that in this universe, maybe the entire universe is like a training ground for souls. And that is why the yin and the yang symbol would seem to be the metaphor for what happens in this universe. A bit of dark in white, a bit of white in dark, always some sort of pit in which there has to be a choice. Are you going to go for the dark? Are you going to go for the light? And maybe ultimately, at the end of infinity, as Roger Penrose says, that universes don't explode and end. They just keep cycling and cycling. And if this was a universe designed to be projected as a hologram with the yin and yang ingredients. That its sole purpose is to be a high university education for souls. And to be in here and then to leave, you have to go through everything we are going through, and that the ones that made us are going through, and that in the end, would we have a perspective ever from another dimension of what it was like to be in this universe, on this planet, where for thousands of years, consciousness was told, you are it. There is no other. And then you get into the 21st century on Earth, and it all begins to fall into place. That may or may not be one of the briefings that Mr. Trump has been given.
And if people want to subscribe to your YouTube channel, which is a really good YouTube channel, or purchase one of your books, where can they go to find that?
Thank you very much. I really love doing the Wednesday nights, and it's sort of like feeling like I've got a world family that comes together to talk about all these difficult subjects. And all you have to do is go to my earthfiles.com website, which is www.earthfiles.com, and right at the top, there is a picture of me with my two big, huge spiritual pals, Fluffy and Chocolate, Himalayan cats that I love to the core of my soul. And every program, if they are up for it, I never make them do anything that they don't want to. But they hang around now. It's like they're waiting for me to pick them up, introduce, say hello, and then put them down. So that is on Wednesday night, starting at 7:30 p.m. on Mountain Time, and then in all the time zones around the world, live for an hour. In the last 30 minutes, I always take Q&A from the audience. And the first 30, I am trying to deal with what I think are really important news in the astrophysical, in biology, in a lot of things that are breaking news, plus a segment with as many whistleblowers as I can do, with everybody understanding that we need the proof, we need hard evidence. But I personally am convinced that giving a forum for whistleblowers who have shown me DD-214s, who have shown me evidence, it isn't like just pulling somebody off the street and putting them on. No, they have background and they have material that we've gone over. But to let them be able to talk and me be able to show some of what they have that's evidentiary, whether it's Antarctica, Arctic, working on the moon, whatever it is. And I'm beginning to see that the whole world, I am getting emails that are coming from Latvia, from Africa, from the Middle East, from Australia, New Zealand, Brazil. I mean, they're just coming from all over the world. And what I feel is that in that Earth Files channel, a space has opened up that has credibility, and everybody knows we can't prove, and the whistleblowers know they can't prove what they're going to say. But so far, everyone that I've had on, if you look back, they have contributed these pieces and insights that are beginning to grow into a bigger and bigger pattern. Now, paralleling that is my Earth Files News website, and that is at www.earthfiles.com, and you don't have to click on the link to go to YouTube, you stay there. And I have now about 3,000 in-depth reports, maybe 100,000 images, maps, illustrations, documents. I've been doing earthfiles.com since 1999 to 2020. And it is divided into science, environment, and real X-Files. Real X-Files and the enormous archive are by subscription. And that then allows me to also put all the animal mutilation stories with photographs in the Real X Files because it is by subscription. So legally, people who might be upset at seeing these pristine bodies, by subscribing, that's legally they're giving permission, and that's where all those stories are. And I also need the support to keep doing these growing projects. And right now, what I'm trying to do is I do the live Wednesday live stream. Then by Sunday of the weekend after Wednesday, I will have the report that I did with the whistleblower or one of the big science. And then I put it all out with the video and or audio, because I do a lot of video. And right now, that seems to be something that people really like. And I've got this, say to your audience, for the last 3 or 4 months, I've said, let's get to 150,000 subscribers and let's have a champagne party around the world. Well, people have really, I'm getting even, I bought a dress to raise the glass of champagne to you, Linda, when we get to 150,000, and we've gone through 144,000, and we're close to 145,000. So maybe in July, we're going to have this digital champagne party, chocolate and fluffy, and we're going to raise glasses, real glasses, to each other on camera. And then for 2 hours, I'm going to answer as many questions as I can get through. And I told everybody, I promise, I will try to be as short as possible. But when you have lived for the life I've had, and you've had 41 years of a challenge of trying to understand what extraterrestrial intelligences are doing on the Earth, and you travel in both hemispheres, that it's like there's this huge canyon. And when somebody asks a question, all of these things perk up that I have experienced or have talked and interviewed. And it's like, if I share as much as I know, at least it's a legacy that can go on when the matter part of me ends. But I know you, me, everyone, the souls continue. And I think that they continue on. There was a famous statement that was said about an Egyptian. In her death was her victory, because everything that she had struggled for, she now could see and interact with on the other side. It was metaphorical and beautiful, but in many ways, that may be the missing part of human life that we do not understand, that we don't end at the level of the soul, the spirit, and consciousness. And that what we've learned and what we've gone through and all of this continues in a viable way in another place and dimension that can have impact back here. So the champagne party, that's the spirit.
And we won't get into it because there's no more time, but there are also some cases that you've covered of reincarnation. Sometimes you don't move on. Sometimes, according to numerous research, which maybe we'll get into another time, you actually are brought back. But is there anything you'd like to say to close this off? I really appreciate your time and you sharing this great information with us.
Thank you. There is a quote from the Buddha that 3 things cannot long be hidden: the sun, the moon, and truth.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Support us on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our full shoot interviews ad-free and help our channel grow. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.